Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this program. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome everyone to this Wednesday afternoon. It's a little bit rainy and dreary here, damp in southern West Virginia. It is the last day of July, the 31st, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. Welcome you to the program, invite you to participate actively in the program by picking up the phone and giving us a call and commenting on some of the issues we're raising. And a lot of what we're doing and have been doing and will be doing today is pretty much an overview of some of the developments, focusing specifically on the evolution of labor history through the 19th and into the early 20th century. And what we're basically trying to do is try to get some context, some background as to why relations between labor and management within the United States are as they are, and why they tend to be so much different than they are in other countries. I want to kind of review a little bit of that at the beginning of today's program, and then I would like to spend a little bit of time in the 19th century looking at the transition from labor management relations that focus principally on the idea of paternalism and become much more profit-driven and much more a function of exploitation of labor, much more than any kind of a paternalistic relationship. And, of course, that controversy between exploitation on the one hand and the desire among many for paternalism on the other gives rise in the late 19th and early 20th century to the introduction of government into the equation in the form of progressivism. And basically what I'd like to do today a little bit is look at the circumstances that produce progressivism and then take a little bit of time, if we have it, to look at the nature of progressivism and compare it, look at the alternatives that labor and the nation faced at the turn of the century from the 19th into the 20th century. But again, all of this is I think is background. It is not information for the sake of information so much, but I think it all provides a context in order for us to better understand exactly where we came from, because it is my feeling that if we continue to operate in our relationships between labor and management as we have in the past, I think we're locked into a worldview and an attitude from both sides, from labor and from management. I think we become prisoners of a past, and we're operating from pretty much of a stereotyped point of view. And it is my feeling that with the kinds of changes and the kinds of challenges that our economy faces today, we've got to find a way to break free of this. But before we can break free, we really need to understand at least a little bit as to how we got here and what is involved in what we tend to believe about labor management relations, where they can go, where they might go, and where they can't go and shouldn't go. So, in a sense, that's our agenda. I welcome you to the program. I invite you to participate actively in it, and I do mean that. Please don't feel that you would be interfering with something by calling and asking a question or making a comment, or indeed, if you are inclined to even change the subject, by all means, that's fine. If it doesn't seem to fit, and we can find a way to table it temporarily and get back to it later, I'll do that and invite you to call back. So I will not. I am not shy, but on the other hand, I am very, very appreciative of your willingness to devote your valuable time to a program like this, to a network like this. And again, I'm speaking of Head On Radio Network. I think one of the things that has become more clear to me than ever, and especially in the 3 or 4 months that we've been doing this program, I guess it's 2 or 3 months. I don't think we've quite made 4 months yet. But the point, if there's anything that has become clearer to me as we've gone along, it's the absolute critical nature of this network and of this kind of a program. The points of view, the attitudes and the ideals and the questions and the commentary that conversation on this network brings out are absolutely vital to the future of the nation. We cannot silence it. If I can veer off on a tangent for a moment as an example of that, this is a little bit of history, my history, more than anything else. But about 12 years ago, and I can't remember the exact number of years, but around 2000, 2001, something like that, around the time of 9/11, very honestly. That's where Bob Kincaid and myself crossed paths, so to speak. We were working at the same terrestrial radio station here in southern West Virginia, and that's where we first met. And I think the plan was that we would kind of provide a different perspective or a little bit of ideological difference between the two of us. But anyway, it doesn't matter what the plan was. The fact of the matter is that we provided a voice to the region. I don't know how else to say that. Terrestrial radio, traditional talk radio, was dominated by one particular ideological point of view, not only here but nationally, as many of you know. This was the period when the Rush Limbaughs and that people of that ilk were dominating talk radio. In fact, there's no question that the strength of the Republican Party is clearly in the 21st century is in large part the result of that dominance. That was an area that was ripe for the taking, and conservatives took it, and took a tremendous advantage of it. But the point was that we did provide an alternative voice to that, and it gave our people in our community here in southern West Virginia an opportunity to express themselves. If they agreed or didn't agree with us, at least they had an opportunity to disagree with us in public. We had an opportunity to exchange ideas and points of view with them. And I can remember conversations that we would have off the air. And basically I can remember making the comment that, it doesn't matter how many people call and disagree with us. The fact of the matter is, the more our point of view is reaching people who don't agree with it, the better it is for everybody. It provides context. It challenges some of the assumptions that many of these folks had, and it was a very important thing. The reason I'm saying all of this is because one of my concerns right now is that there is no such local outlet in this region anymore, for reasons which I'm not quite sure of, but I think I know. These progressive liberal voices, if you will, have disappeared from terrestrial talk radio. And there are a number of issues, local issues, facing our region here. One of them is the issue of coal and the campaign to try to pin the sad state of the economy on the Obama administration, and this is a concerted effort that's coming from coal companies and from the corporate sector in a number of different areas. And there is no local alternative. There's no voice. There's no opportunity for exchange or questioning. There's no way to challenge that. And so, in a sense, we in this region, I've talked to some folks who agree with me. It doesn't feel like we have an opportunity locally to be heard. We do have this network, the Head On Radio Network. And there are other progressive networks around the country. I understand that. It is absolutely vital that it continue to be heard. It continues to be heard. It is absolutely essential, because right now I'm using this as an example. We are in a region where there is no voice. There is no opportunity to challenge. There is one ideological position controlling the media in all of its aspects. And it is a little bit frightening. There's no response at all. And so as we look at the national level and the international level, it has become more and more clear to me as the weeks have gone on here at the Virtual Center that what is happening with the head-on radio network, with the Horn, and what we're trying to do in our little way with the Virtual Center is to basically provide an alternative, an opportunity for dialogue, an opportunity for expression, an opportunity for the theory of the marketplace of ideas to really have an opportunity to work. And it is absolutely essential that this network stay on the air. Absolutely essential. Because there really isn't a viable alternative. And all of us, as citizens, need an alternative. We can talk about theory, we can talk about conceptual approaches to the free exchange of ideas in the marketplace. We can talk about the efforts of the Supreme Court to reinforce this in the Citizens United case, all of which is true. But the fact of the matter is, if there is going to be a real exchange, if there really is going to be conversation, if there is going to be real dialogue and exchange on points of view, then it is absolutely essential that this voice, this perspective, remain out there in the marketplace so that people can hear it and react to it and respond to it. And that is one of the things that I've learned in the short time that I've been here at the Virtual Center. And so I'm very appreciative of the Head On Network. I'm very appreciative of Bob Kincaid and his folks for their willingness to put a program like this on the air. But more importantly, I'm appreciative for what they are trying to do. I know Bob frequently talks about, when he's talking about the Horn, he's talking about the idea of keeping the conversation alive. Because this is conversation radio. It must be conversation radio, and it must continue to be there. And if we look at the kinds of things that are happening in nations around the world, it's very clear that when the worst things are happening, it's in part because the conversation and the exchange of points of view and ideas disappears. When all the perspective that you hear and read is coming from one particular direction, and there is no way to respond, there is no outlet, there's no healthy exchange, what you end up with is decisions which are weak and untested. And ultimately, we end up producing something worse. So I think it's absolutely vital that this network stay on the air. And again, I appreciate your willingness to spend time with us today and other days. I appreciate that very, very much. Look forward to hearing from you. I mean that. Our phone number is area code 304-658-3333. We invite you to use it. That's area code 304-658-3333. If you would like to contact me directly via email and express your point of view there, if it is something that seems to be worthy of conversation and the information to the benefit of the other people listening, then I will ask you for permission in response to share your thinking and your ideas with people. I obviously would much prefer that you call and express it on the air yourself, but if for some reason you're uncomfortable doing that and you want to send it to me and we can exchange ideas back and forth, and if it's something that is rich enough that it goes beyond just you and me, then I'm going to ask for your permission to share it with our listening audience. My email address is waobrien906. That's IEN O'Brien, OBRIEN 906 at gmail.com. waobrien906, all one word, no punctuation in there, no apostrophes or commas or anything else. waobrien906 at gmail.com. A little bit of review from yesterday as kind of a lead-in to today. Yesterday we were talking about the origins of...
Hey, Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob.
Sorry, before you get into your lead-in, I just wanted to take a moment and let you know that you've got Jeff on the line.
Yes.
All right, stand by.
Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Go ahead.
Hi, Jeff.
Hello, Dr. Bill. I sent you an email. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it yet, but all the stuff you and Bob talk about, and I hate to sound like a broken record, it's very frustrating to me because you guys are right on target. The problem I'm running into is you don't really have any solutions, and everything is working exactly the way things are supposed to work. It's just that they're just not moving the way we think they should. But if you got a chance to look at that,
I will do that, Jeff. I promise.
But Dr. David Bork out of RPI was one of the founders of this measurement, and he explained it so well about why we need to be able to value human labor. When you mentioned what's going wrong with the labor movement and why things are the way they are, it's directly related. It doesn't matter what laws we try to change or what political party we're trying to put in. If I control the economy, it doesn't matter what your laws do. I'm still in charge of the economy, and that's what's wrong with the system. But I just wanted to, and your shows are great. I love your stuff, but you can't step far enough back to see the problem. I think you have the ability to. I think everyone does, but we just have to be able to get that explained. That's all I'm trying to put out.
I appreciate it.
But don't stop working, and please look at that. Please listen to that 1 hour program.
Jeff, I will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. I appreciate you calling. Thank you very much. I appreciate that call, and I appreciate the point of view, and I will definitely look at the email that Jeff has sent. I can say without looking at the email, I can't say that I'm not going to take issue with Jeff, but I am going to acknowledge that my goal here at the virtual center is information. It is not. I'm not out to solve problems. I don't claim to have any magic wand or any solution to particular problems. I do believe, however, that greater understanding and greater information and appreciation for where we are and how we got here is absolutely vital before solutions begin to surface. But I believe that if we get into the position of promoting a particular solution or a particular answer, then we basically are not solving a problem, we are merely contributing to it. Because I think the solutions come from people's understanding and appreciation and greater understanding of where we are and what's happening. As far as the idea of the Virtual Center for the Study of the United States Constitution, I really believe that this is critical. And the reason I say that is because there are all sorts of centers for the study of the Constitution in a variety of different settings, universities and colleges around the country. And scholars are spending, an incredible amount of time researching the sources and all the rest of it. But what prompts me and what prompts the network, the horn, in this kind of a program is that it seems to me that there is a general lack of appreciation and understanding out there, not only for the internal ingredients of the Constitution itself, but for the impact and the implications of how that Constitution and its interpretation affects people's day-to-day lives in an ongoing basis. I'm struck by a call that we received day before yesterday from Betsy in Texas. Betsy teaches middle school, and she conducted an experiment related to the Constitution. And she asked her students, some of the brightest students as far as the standardized testing goes, it identifies the students who are the brightest. She basically asked a fairly substantial number of students to list 5 things they knew about the Constitution of the United States. And the results she got, now grant, these are middle school children, youngsters. They aren't even they just entered their teens. The fact that she got nothing from anybody is the reason that the Virtual Center is here. That kind of research that she did on her own reinforces the reason that I'm here and why I think this is important. I don't feel comfortable to be in a position where I can tell people how to live their lives. I would suggest to you that that is a form of paternalism. I'm much more interested in people making the solutions and sharing ideas and coming to common understandings and appreciation of issues and factors and potential solutions themselves. But the first step in that is to begin to understand where we are, what's going on, the nature of the political system, the kind of society that we live in, and all the rest of it. I believe if we get into the position of telling people what the truth is, then in effect we are suggesting to people that it is a waste of their time to try to look for their own version, for the truth for themselves. And it's only when people are on the search for truth, it's when people seek to know that good things happen. We have a society that is dominated by people with points of view, the sum total of which is to convince the vast number of our young people and not so young people that the pursuit of truth is a waste of time, that everything worth knowing is already known, and that somehow somebody is going to come in with the answer. All we have to do is wait for it and recognize it when it comes. I would suggest to you that Jesus Christ came into the world with the answers, and substantial numbers of people did not accept the messenger. And I would suggest right now that the last thing I want to become is a messenger. What I want to do is prepare the ground by taking what little bit I know and sharing it with people out there that I think can put it to better use than I can. And that's really what the Virtual Center is about. I think that there's a general misunderstanding, a lack of appreciation of the nature of the political system, what it's about, where we are, how we got here, and how we might address some of the issues to basically make the future look a little bit better for more of us. But I think that's something that people are going to have to discover for themselves. It's not something that I can tell them. It's not something that I feel comfortable telling them. One of the things, I was in a conversation earlier today with a good friend, and I was sharing with him a little bit of the program yesterday. He wasn't listening to the program yesterday, and I shared with him the quote from the Supreme Court of Canada in 2007 about the nature of collective bargaining. And his response when I shared the quote with him was that Canada is quite a bit different than the United States. And I thought about that. And what he was suggesting is that you can put Canada in a category with the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, etc., as well as Western Europe and Germany and the rest of them, as far as relationships between labor and management go, the whole idea of codetermination. And he sees Canada in that realm rather than in our realm. And, of course, what he's basically saying I think, is the issue. We are in a realm by ourselves. We have developed our own understanding and appreciation and explanation for the priorities and the relationships that exist between labor and management of this country, which are a product of our past and are a product of a series of assumptions and realities. And it is absolutely critical that we begin to understand them and appreciate them if we can expect to move beyond them. Otherwise, we remain imprisoned by them. And I think our situation with management and labor in this country today is more or less imprisoned and constrained by the assumptions and the beliefs and the history that have brought us to this point. And I don't believe that we are in a position as a society where we can move forward until we are able to get rid of some of these constraints and to break free from some of the assumptions which underlie those very restraints. The quote that I'm talking about from the Canadian Supreme Court in 2007 on the issue of collective bargaining says the following. This is a quote. "The right to bargain collectively with an employer enhances the human dignity, liberty, and autonomy of workers by giving them the opportunity to influence the establishment of workplace rules and thereby gain some control over a major aspect of their lives, namely their work." Okay, let me pause there for a moment. The right to bargain collectively with an employer enhances the human dignity, the liberty, and the autonomy of workers by giving them the opportunity to influence the establishment of workplace rules and thereby gain some control over a major aspect of their lives, namely their work. Please think about that in the context of what you know about labor management relations as they exist in the United States today. I would suggest to you that if you go all the way back into the colonial period in the 18th century, what you would confront is a way of thinking which suggests that workers in the workplace are not capable of making those kinds of decisions and experiencing and benefiting from that kind of liberty and that kind of autonomy. The paternalism which dominated society in the 17th and 18th century was based on the idea that everybody was not equal and that certain people are better able to define the public interest for other people than those other people themselves. Don't take my word for it. James Madison said that in Federalist Number 10. It may well happen, he said, that the public interest as defined by the representatives of the people will be more consonant to the public good than if defined by the people themselves. That is a paraphrase, but comes pretty close to a quote from Federalist Number 10 by James Madison. Madison was not speaking as a revolutionary. Madison was not introducing an idea that was alien to the context. He was preaching to the choir. In Federalist Number 10, he was speaking to those whose support for the Constitution would be necessary in order to get it approved, to get it ratified in the various states. In order to do that, he's not in a position to say something that those whose support he seeks are not comfortable with. Think of what sitting in a pew in some church on Sunday morning and listening to a preacher, I don't care what denomination you're talking about, listening to a sermon from a priest, a rabbi, a minister, a pastor, whatever you want to call it. The one thing we know is that the reason the pastor has a congregation, a church full of people, is because these people have concluded that what this pastor is saying is what they are most comfortable with. If he continued to challenge the thinking of his congregation, if he continued to say things that were alien and contradictory to what these people believed, they wouldn't come back. So in order to keep his membership, or her membership, the pastor must say what the people want to hear. Madison in Federalist number 10 is saying what the people he's speaking to want to hear. And what he is saying is paternalism. He is advocating and reinforcing their faith in the fact that the few must tell the many what is in the public interest, because the many are driven more by their own self-interest than they are by the public interest. That's Madison's message. That's the paternalism that dominates this society. That's what people in the know believe. So when the Supreme Court in Canada in 2007 talks about the human dignity and the liberty and the autonomy of workers to have some influence over the establishment of workplace rules and to gain control, some control, over the major aspect of their lives, namely the work they do, management in our society does not accept that. The history of labor management relations in the United States does not accept that. And I would suggest to you that labor has reacted to that assumption, to that point of view on the part of management, in very predictable terms. Labor knows damn well that management doesn't accept their ability and their capabilities to make intelligent contributions to workplace decisions. So labor's logical reaction to that fact is to organize in order to try to gain that access to the decision-making table, if you will, by force. And the interaction and communication and relationship between labor and management in American society and American history from the very beginning has been one of distrust and hostility, and whatever rights are gained, they are gained based on the issue of power. Collective bargaining within the United States is not reasoned thinking together based on the respect of one party for the other. Labor management relations in the United States is an interaction from positions of power. That's been the past. Those are the assumptions that drive it. And basically, management's position is that workers are primarily driven by their own self-interest. What's best for the company, what's best for the stockholders, what's best for the economy, what's best for the nation, doesn't matter to them. That's the assumption that management has traditionally made in American society. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, that's the way it is. And I would suggest to you that environment has produced a very predictable result, a very predictable response on the part of labor. But let me go one step further than that. Labor's predictable response turns out to reinforce the assumptions which created that environment in the first place. In other words, labor is responding, labor is acting in exactly the ways that management anticipates that it will react. And the sum total of that is that labor is more convinced than it was going in that its assumptions about labor's interest only in themselves and in their own self-interest and welfare is well placed. So what we have is a series of actions and reactions back and forth between the two sides, each side convincing the other side that its assumptions are on target, absolutely accurate, and need not be questioned. What that means is that each side reacts in ways which are very predictable. Consequently, the other side will take preventative action in anticipation of what they expect the other side to do. And more often than not, their predictions are right on. What I am suggesting is that the sum total of that is that both sides are ensnared, are trapped by the procedure and the assumptions which drive it. And somehow it's that relationship, that interactive relationship and the assumptions which drive it, which need to be questioned. And that's what this is all about. What I'm saying is that that first sentence in the Supreme Court ruling from Canada in 2007 about workers having the autonomy and the freedom to make significant contributions to their own workplace and the conditions of the work aspects of their own lives is a position which would not conform to the assumptions which most employers have towards the employees with which they negotiate. The Canadian Supreme Court goes on. Collective bargaining is not simply an instrument for pursuing external ends. Rather, it is intrinsically valuable as an experience in self-government. Think about that. The very process of reasoning together in a collective bargaining environment where there is an element, it's not total respect and total trust because it's obviously a negotiation. But there has to be an element of trust and respect on each side for the other side in order for this more positive approach to collective bargaining to work. And the point is that when two sides that don't necessarily agree on everything can sit down and reason together and seek solutions, that becomes, the court says, intrinsically valuable as an experience in self-government. That process, in and of itself, has value. Collective bargaining, the court says, permits workers to achieve a form of workplace democracy and to ensure the rule of law in the workplace. Workers gain a voice to influence the establishment of rules that control a major aspect of their lives. I would suggest to you, if you look at labor management relations in the United States, that decision reached by the Canadian Supreme Court in 2007, that's not where we are, that's where we need to be. And it seems to me that we need to understand why that perspective, which in Europe is referred to as co-determination, the willingness to allow representatives of labor to sit at decision-making tables and board tables and stockholders' meetings and all the rest of it, recognizing that the workers have a key role to play in the overall success of the enterprise. They are the ones who do the work. They are the ones who perform the service or help to produce the product. They are the ones whose creativity and wisdom and inventiveness and insight is going to make the improvements in the product or service that the enterprise must have in order to compete successfully in a global marketplace. Somehow we have got to get management, decision makers in America willing to accept, never mind accept the reality of that perspective, accept the possibility that it might be real. And when we start to see genuine concessions one side to the other, we will be on the road to a recognition that both sides have something positive to contribute to the success of the whole. And that's really what we're after. Yesterday we looked at the Boston Associates. We looked at the establishment of the Waltham Mills by the Boston Associates. It is important to understand a factor which I neglected to mention, but I think it's very important, is that in order to set this system up, these companies received the go-ahead from the state of Massachusetts, from the legislature. Government is buying in to the fact that for this industry to make it and do what it expects to do, to be successful, is not just in the interest of the stockholders and the owners of the company. It's not just in the interest of the people working there. It is to the interest of the economy and all the citizens in the state. In other words, the state of Massachusetts is deciding that this system, the creation of this factory, this mill, this textile mill, is a positive good for the public interest of the citizens of Massachusetts. It is making the same decision about the public interest that the King of England made in the colonial period when he issued charters to the Virginia Company and to the Massachusetts Bay Company and to William Penn and to Lord Baltimore in Maryland and all the rest of them. When the king gives them a charter, the king is basically saying, the best interest of the empire over which I rule is to be served if these ventures are successful. And therefore, as the spokesman for the citizens of the empire, I am making a decision that whatever we can do to ensure the success of this venture is in the public interest. It's an interrelationship, a reciprocal relationship between government and business that exists from the very beginning. And when state governments and legislatures are in the position of incorporating businesses, that's the same thing as a king issuing a charter. And government is doing what it needs to do in order to promote the public interest. And it is based on the assumption that that is a positive. And the labor force that these mills develop is a domestic, predominantly female labor force. And one of the most intriguing and successful aspects of this whole initiative is that the managers of the company are able to break down, to separate the various aspects of the job to be done, the transition from raw cotton, raw materials into finished cloth, into a finished product. They are able to divide or separate the various aspects of the process to a degree that they are able to get unskilled labor to be able to do it. If they needed to recruit skilled people who knew how to process raw cotton into finished cloth, they would pay a fortune for that skill. That labor force would be so expensive that the company might not be able to stay in business. But by breaking down the process into its constituent parts and assigning unskilled people to do each small part of the total process, you can use unskilled labor to produce a highly skilled product. That is one, if you remember your textbooks, that is one of the major contributions that Eli Whitney made to industrialism in America. Not only did he develop the cotton gin, but Whitney also is given credit for adopting or enacting what we call the process of interchangeable parts. The idea of breaking the whole down into its constituent parts into such a way that you can basically manufacture the parts, and the parts are interchangeable enough that they fit together logically at the end to produce the product. And that's what makes industrialism go. That's what makes industrialism productive and economically successful. Because as long as you relied on domestic folks to complete the process from beginning to end, which is a highly skilled, highly technical process, then you need highly trained, highly skilled people to do it. But when you are able to divide the process into its constituent parts, you were able to assign each small part of the whole to an unskilled laborer. Now, part of and we're talking about industrialism here, the psychology of the process. Part of the process here, part of the challenge, of course, is to maintain the commitment and the positive attitude of your employees, because these employees who are involved in making one small portion of some total product do not receive the self-satisfaction in the end of creating the product. The satisfaction that an individual gets from conceiving something and going from design to drawing to actual production and turning out something that really works. There's a tremendous sense of satisfaction and accomplishment that goes with that. The challenge for industrialism in America is to try to find alternative ways to introduce that self-satisfaction into a process where the work itself doesn't produce it. There's a tendency to look at the people who are involved in this process, the unskilled workers, as cogs in a machine. And one of the things that we see in the history of industrial development, not only in America but other industrial societies as well, is the occasional, and sometimes more than occasional, rebellion on the line, so to speak, where people will consciously sabotage the process as a way of raising a red flag and saying to everybody, hey, it's me, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm a person, I have value. Because the system itself becomes so impersonal and so automatic that it seems to depersonalize the people who are involved in it. That's one of the psychological negatives of the Industrial Revolution, it seems to me, is what it does to workers. But the Boston Manufacturing Company is able to basically introduce modern industrial techniques into the production of fine cloth from raw cotton. And they are able to secure the go-ahead from the state of Massachusetts to do it in terms of a charter, of papers of incorporation, the right to exist and do business within the state. And then they go about recruiting labor, and it's domestic labor, and it's these young women from rural New England who come in and live, and not only work in a controlled environment, but live in a controlled environment. Their day-to-day existence, their hour-by-hour existence is supervised by house mothers. Residence halls in our residential colleges and universities in the United States are modeled on this, where the dormitories have directors and fellows and house fellows and all the rest of it, supervisors on each floor to maintain order and stability. It's a throwback to this. And so the company house the workforce. And these girls are offered cultural education and experiences as well as the opportunity to work. And the idea is that they will come out of the experience as cultured, well-informed young ladies. The system is incredibly paternalistic. And it recognizes, and I think this is important, it recognizes that there is value in labor. It recognizes the value and the worth and the importance of a positive attitude on the part of those who work in the mill. And the process recognizes that happy, fulfilled workers maximize the product at the other end. That's what we have lost. And part of it stems from the desire to extend or expand profit. Part of it comes from efforts to try to cut back on what it costs to house and train and provide the ancillary services associated with these young women in the workforce. Part of it comes from the introduction of immigrant labor, since the work is unskilled, since you have so adjusted the process, the manufacturing process itself. You've created a job that anybody can do. Then when you gain access to a labor force that you do not have to expend the education and the culture and all the other accoutrements that are associated with the value of the workplace at the beginning, then what you end up with is what we know today as a very traditional labor management relation. The girls begin to organize, the girls begin to strike, the girls begin to engage in work stoppages in order to gain concessions from the employers. The employers respond by importing immigrant labor, cutting back on expenses, and the entire process becomes one of hostility and power rather than the paternalistic relationship that existed at the very beginning. And so what we see is the beginning of a process where labor and management end up at odds with each other, to the point that we have the ingredients necessary, that go into the development of organized labor in America, the union movement throughout the 19th century. And again, it's not just a logical outcome that we're looking at. I think one of the most telling, we've mentioned this before here at the Virtual Center, but I just want to remind you of this. So much exploitation tends to exist in the relationship between management and labor in industrialism as it develops in America, that Southern defenders of slavery actually set out to defend slavery by pointing out that the paternalism that exists between slave owner and slave is much more humane than the relationship of pure power and exploitation that exists in northern industry. What Southern defenders of slavery are basically saying is that the free labor system that is driving the Industrial Revolution in the North has become so problematic and includes so much exploitation and hostility and distrust between employer and employee that, in effect, it's making the slave system look good. It's making the slave system something that actually can be defended when held up and examined against it. And the fact of the matter is that the existence of that kind of a hostile workplace relationship becomes the environment which affects the future relationships between labor and management in the United States. Each side's distrust for the other is increased. Each side's assumption about the priorities of the other side becomes more firmly entrenched. Employers are convinced that the only thing that drives workers is self-interest, is money. As increasing the hourly wage, or increasing, winning things like a shorter workday, more per hour, winning things like paid vacations. I remember one of the most telling billboards that I've seen. This has happened within the last year. I was driving to Boston from Weston, Massachusetts a couple of years ago on the Massachusetts Turnpike, and I remember seeing a billboard advertising union labor. And the basic message on the billboard was, support union workers. Unions, the people that brought you weekends. And I was so struck by that it is the negotiated process, the collective bargaining process within the United States that produced the idea of weekends, the idea of the 40-hour work week, the idea of half time for overtime, double time for weekends and holidays, and many of the other things that workers increasingly take for granted in today's world. But all of it is the product of organized power in relationships between one side and the other. And the result is a tradition of relationship between management and labor in the United States which rejects the very essence of the assumptions which make something like codetermination possible. To the point that if you go to the internet and look up codetermination, as I've mentioned before, on Wikipedia, you will find the fact that the labor situation within the United States is excluded. Wikipedia says, basically, the kind of trust and relationship that exists between labor and management for codetermination to work does not exist in the United States, where the distrust and hostility between management and labor is much more pronounced. Where did it come from? Why is that true? I would suggest to you that background, that reality is very, very important to understand. We have reached the top of our first hour. We're going to take a 5-minute break. But when we come back, we're going to look at labor's efforts to find ways to deal with this kind of an environment. Labor, different strategies, different approaches to union organizing and efforts in the United States. And in the process, we're going to begin to look at what separates, what distinguishes liberalism in American society from what we call radicalism. We're going to be able to distinguish different strategies of organization on the part of labor, working people. And we're going to be able to distinguish between those that threaten the very existence of free enterprise society in America as opposed to those that do not. I think it's a very, very important distinction to make, and we'll make it today during our second hour. Let's take a pause, a 5-minute break, so to speak. It's 2 minutes after the hour. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution. We're here on the Head On Radio Network, as we usually are 3 days per week. I'm Bill O'Brien, and after a short break, we'll be right back.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution of the United States with your host, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome back to the second hour of today's edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution. I am Bill O'Brien, and if you are just joining us, welcome to today's program. Our phone number, area code 304-658-3333. That number will get you into our studios, and we'll get you on the air pronto. During our first hour, we had a call right at the very beginning from Jeff, and I think the one thing you got from that is it's very easy, and hopefully you recognize the fact that we do look forward to hearing from you and hearing your ideas and finding out what you think about some of these issues. So again, the phone number, area code 304-658-3333. My email address, if you'd like to contact me personally about issues we're talking about, or perhaps even issues we're not. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, 906, no punctuation at all, at gmail.com. I wanted to pick up on what we were talking about in our first hour about the issues of paternalism and the transition to a system, a relationship between labor and management, which is based much more on exploitation than it is on trust and respect. And then we get into the issues of, if that is the environment, I'm not going to go back to where we were yesterday about the idea of environment controlling man's development, John Locke, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, except to point out that this is the environment within which labor feels that it must operate. And so, in a sense, the very environment produces the response. The response reinforces the need for such an environment, and we're off and running. And I think that's very significant. I don't want to get on a tangent, but I thought that something just occurred to me, which might contribute to an understanding of this idea. There are many people, and I'm one, who believes that the best way to understand the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States after World War II is to recognize the reciprocal nature of that relationship, is to recognize that there are interests, there are entities on each side which recognize that their very existence, their influence, is directly dependent on the threat from the other side. President Eisenhower's prophetic warning about the dangers of the industrial complex, the military-industrial complex, recognizing that military development on both sides was out of control, as each side was so convinced that the other side posed a military threat to its very existence, to its way of life, that it became impossible to control, manage, or check military development on either side. And the result of that is that the relationship that developed between military interests and the industrial sector, both in the Soviet Union and in the United States, that relationship depended for its very existence on the threat posed by the other side. So while the relationship is a hostile one based on distrust, it becomes in reality a very predictable one, where each side is so comfortable in predicting the actions of the other side that it in turn knows that by taking certain actions it can provoke a certain response. And if it's that response that is your objective, then you can almost be sure of getting it by the particular actions you take. And the irony is, if you look at the interaction, the reciprocal nature of the relationship that exists between the two sides, it's very, very similar to the power relationship that exists and the reciprocal relationship that exists between labor and management in the United States. Some of the most successful CEOs, managers, within industrial America reach their positions primarily because of the track record they have in dealing with labor, and vice versa. So in a sense, some of the more negative things that many people believe about unions stem from the fact that leaders on both sides depend for their success on the hostility that exists between the two sides. They are products of that, and they have profited from that hostility. And I think that's very important to recognize. But at the period we're talking about the kind of environment and what it seems to dictate for the individual. It's pretty obvious that one thing is very, very clear, and that is that the individual worker in this kind of an industrial environment becomes powerless in negotiations with the employer, especially when much of the work is unskilled. What that means is there are any number of people out there waiting for your job if you do something that costs you your job. And the mere fact that that reality exists, that there are not only people out there who want your job, but there are people out there who can do your job because your job has been so redefined and restructured that it really doesn't require a whole lot of expertise and talent and knowledge. That's the nature of unskilled labor. Well, the reality is there are a lot of people within the working community in the United States who consider themselves skilled. The trade unions, for example, the craft unions. Those people whose position within the industry has been earned through years of apprenticeship and years of secondary status, probably through years of reduced salaries, where you don't get the full complement of your salary until you reach a certain point and pass some sort of proficiency test to earn your license as a licensed plumber or a licensed electrician or a licensed carpenter or whatever. Samuel Gompers, for example, who's given responsible for leading the American Federation of Labor from its organization in the 1880s well into the 20th century, was a cigar maker. And those people who had perfected the process of producing high-quality cigars resented the assumption that they were looked upon as no different than unskilled labor. Resented the fact that their skills and their talents and their abilities and the time that they had invested in becoming a craftsman in this one area of production those accomplishments are given little credibility by the employers within an industrial system which seems to be growing more and more in the direction of unskilled labor. And so you have two different approaches, two different possibilities here about how labor can best or should best organize. One is that those who have perfected specific crafts, talents, skills, those who have gone through the apprenticeship process and have been trained by the best in learning a skill so that they can produce a product that nobody else can produce. The assumption is that those craft people, those craftsmen, should organize together in order to get what they want, to improve the circumstances of their own work life, their own environment, the workplace. Guarantee things like coffee breaks or breaks between lunch or breakfast. For example, the mills, the girls that worked in the mills, the bells that went off to wake them up in the morning, 4 a.m. And they would report for work, ready for work at 5 a.m. And later on in industrial America, when the technology is produced, we have time clocks where people punch in and punch out. So there's a record of every single minute they worked and every single minute that they did not work. And you begin to think of the dehumanization of the labor process that exists in that. And so there's a built-in bias and lack of respect and trust within workers themselves between skilled and unskilled. And so it stands to reason that the craftsmen, the skilled, would seek to organize with their own people and offer their services as a group to an employer, and basically saying to them, you're going to get, if you hire us and create the kind of work environment that we can sit down and reason together, we'll give you a product that you can be proud of and that will outsell all your competition. So the craft unions, by definition, offer quality in production. And then there's the other approach, which is based on the idea that there are two sides in this game, those with the power and the people who work in the mills that don't have any. And the only thing that power understands is power. And therefore, what we have to do is organize ourselves, because as individuals, we have no clout. But as an organized entity or a union, we do. And so what you end up with is the idea that irrespective of whether you're skilled or unskilled, whether you're a craftsman, whether you have a license or whether you don't, whether you're a recent immigrant or whatever, all of us who work in industrial America have something in common. We are all on the short end of the proverbial stick. There is more to unite us than there is to divide us. The question that I would ask you to think about is this one. If you were the employer and you were facing a workforce invested in the process of organizing and creating a union, from your perspective, which approach would be easier for you to deal with? I would suggest to you that if all people who work see themselves as united, if all people who work begin to look at themselves as having more in common despite the different kinds of work they do, but as workers within an environment where they individually don't have any power, whereas as a united force they do have power, then I would suggest that from the employer's perspective, using the term doesn't apply early in the 19th century, but by the late 19th century it does. From corporate America's perspective, playing one group against the other group benefits the employer. The greatest threats to the power of corporate America come from efforts to organize all workers based on the perspective. What you're doing is you're encouraging people to look at the big picture. You're encouraging people to look who works and look who doesn't. Look who produces and look who gets all the money for it. If people begin to look at the workplace that way, that is potentially very dangerous. That, by definition, defines radicalism. Because the objectives of workers in that kind of an environment is to seize power. Chances are the objectives of workers who organize by craft, that group can be satisfied with improvements in the workplace. Guaranteed breaks. An extra 10 to 15 minutes added on to the lunch hour. Reduction of the workday from 16 hours to 12, or 12 to 10, or 10 to 8. Overtime for work beyond a certain amount, for beyond 10 hours or 8 hours or whatever. Safety improvements within the workplace. Improved ventilation. Having medical expertise on site in case somebody gets hurt in a dangerous work environment. Being able to get sick without thinking that you're going to lose your job because somebody's standing there waiting to take your job away. Recognizing that people have responsibilities to family that might interfere with their ability to report on a regular basis, at scheduled times to work. And dealing with an employer who is willing to make concessions in those areas. In other words, from the employer's perspective, it's much easier to deal with negotiations focused on the workplace itself than it is to deal with an organization whose rationale is based on the idea that we do all the work and you get all the money. That we're not appreciated and you get all the accolades. That we're being treated as if we were interchangeable parts, that we were not human. We are not respected as people. We are not respected as human beings. We are all seen as being expendable. That, from the employer's point of view, is a very, very difficult, challenging perspective to deal with. Because whatever concessions you make to that kind of an environment, from an employer's point of view, whatever concessions you make are seen as Band-Aids. Because you can't make the kinds of concessions that these people are demanding. What they're demanding is a change in the whole system of free enterprise. What they're talking about is something that borders on radicalism. Examples. For a while in America, one of the most successful organizations is the Knights of Labor. The Noble Order of the Knights of Labor. A secret organization that emerges in the 1870s after the collapse of an organization, of an entity called the National Labor Union. By definition, the National Labor Union is just that. It's an effort to organize all working people into one giant union. The potential threat to free enterprise from that kind of an organization is potent. In effect, the National Labor Union, just by its very title, suggests an effort of organizers to create what James Madison called the majority faction. James Madison in Federalist Number 10 laid out the idea that we have factions are sown in the nature of man. There are minority factions and majority factions. Stability demands a multiplicity of minority factions. Because if ever the majority faction unites, they take power. If you take that concept and apply it to the workplace, efforts to create something like a national labor union, which collapses in, I believe, 1873. That's when the Knights of Labor takes off, first under the leadership of Terence Powderly. Actually, it begins with the creation. It is created. The Knights of Labor is created by Uriah Stevens in 1869 in the late 1860s, and then the organization, the Grand Master of the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor, is Terence Powderly. And through the late 70s and into the 80s, the Knights of Labor begins to grow precipitously. By 1886, the Knights of Labor have over 700,000 members. They dropped the idea of noble order from their name and just start calling themselves the Knights of Labor, because the noble order in the title smacks of the idea of the noble order of the Masons. And the Knights of Labor is, for the most part, a secret organization. And part of the reason that they're secret is because people who are identified as members of this union organizing effort are fired. Employers fire them. So the only way they can function is in secret. And they have codes and all the rest of it. Well, the mere fact that it's secret creates all sorts of suspicions on the part not only of employers, but the general public. The important thing to mention here, I know this is, everybody understands this, but it's important to mention it just as well. Employers are not naive. They know that the more that they can exacerbate the threat, the more that they can play up the secret nature of the organization, the fact that they are plotting in secret, that they are manipulating the situation, that they are browbeating members to stay in the union, etc., etc., etc. It becomes much easier for them to shape public opinion, which is very positive. The next logical step, if you have a public and a public opinion that believes that everything that America and the American Republic stands for, like individual freedom and hard work and success and opportunity and all the things that make America great, all of those things are violated by the concept of unions. The very idea of a union is alien to everything theoretically that America is about. The value, the importance and the value of the individual freedom, individual initiative, the pursuit of opportunity. All of the things that focus on individual freedom in America seem to be contradicted by the very concept of unions. So by definition, unions have a tough PR way to hoe. They have a tough challenge because public opinion is against them from the very beginning, because everything they do and everything they stand for seems to violate the basic principles on which America is based. And obviously, government's action follows appropriately in order. Government's inclination is to support the employer rather than the organized effort of workers to affect the workplace. So the Knights of Labor experienced some success in the late 70s and 80s. The Union Pacific Railroad strike in 1884, for example, is considered to be a victory for the Knights. The basic idea of the Knights of Labor, their ideology, was to secure an 8-hour day. They also wanted to end child labor and convict labor. They advocated a graduated income tax. They believed that people's taxes ought to be based on what they make, that the people that make the most should pay the most. That's the principle of the graduated income tax. They were also very, very active in support of what are called cooperatives, organized efforts of working people to grow their own food and open their own stores and provide for their own needs and various other things. All of that alien to free enterprise. We're talking about something here that smacks of Marxism. Unions, in people's minds, unions are kind of Marxist, socialist, radical, alien to the whole idea of free enterprise, the whole idea of what America's about, the whole idea of the value of the individual. The Knights of Labor seeks to be mostly inclusive rather than exclusive. It accepts women. After 1878, it accepts blacks. The only people that the Knights of Labor will not accept into its membership are bankers, doctors, lawyers, stockholders, and liquor manufacturers. All of these are excluded because all of them are considered to be non-productive members of society. These are not people who work. These are people that profit from the work of other people. The Knights don't want any part of them. Everybody who works, everybody who's self-sufficient. However, they do exclude Asians. They will not accept Chinese labor. And so therefore they're very supportive when Congress passes the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. They try to limit the importation of Orientals into the idea because the assumption is that these people will take their jobs. It's a source of cheap labor for employers. And by definition, cheap immigrant labor threatens job security. So in that sense, they are exclusive. But the mere fact that they seek to organize everybody who works, and they teach their members a worldview which encourages people to look at classes, not look at the individual and the value of the individual and the freedom of the individual, which is what America's value system is about. But the Knights encourage people to look at the world from the position of those who work and those who steal from the people who work. Those whose income is not earned. That whole perspective, that worldview that the Knights encourage their people to subscribe to is considered to be threatening to employers, to political leaders, to politicians, to members of Congress, etc. It becomes very easy because in 1849, the Communist Manifesto was written. And Marx is responsible for an analysis of free enterprise capitalism, which predicts its ultimate destruction, which predicts the revolution of the working class and the overthrow of the entrepreneurial class, the eventual overthrow of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat. It encourages people to look at society based on the idea of class. That's what Marx does. That's what the Knights do. That's what the National Labor the National Labor Union does. That is a perspective that threatens the very rationale, the very basis of the American Republic. Within that context, the efforts of Samuel Gompers and others to organize craft unions and to engage in bargaining, in negotiation between labor and management, with the principal objective being improved conditions in the workplace rather than global conditions like making sure that the people who do the work receive the benefits. The overturning of the whole free enterprise system, which is what these national organizations, national effort to unify all people who work and exclude only those people, those very specific identified groups of people who don't work but who are exploiters of the people who do work. Against that background, against that kind of a threat, employers find it much safer, much easier to deal with craft unions, with skilled workers. Employers find it beneficial to them to do everything they can do, not only to shape public opinion against unions as a whole, but to do everything they can do to find the ingredients of discord within the labor force. Play up the differences. Play up the differences between the skilled and the unskilled. Play up the differences between native-born Americans and foreign immigrants. Play up the differences of nationality. Play up religion. Anything that divides from management's perspective is a good thing, is a positive. Management engages in the process of divide and conquer. And the model for that is Federalist Number 10. The founders themselves laid out a strategy in order to make sure that the majority faction never exists, never organizes, is never able to execute its plans of oppression. James Madison quote. So also the strategy from management's perspective is to divide and conquer as well. To play the race card, to play the gender card, to play the religion card, to play the skilled versus the unskilled card. I am not for 1 second suggesting that there ought not to be value assigned to the differences between skilled and unskilled, between crafts and unskilled labor, between those skilled workers who are licensed for the quality of the work they do and those who aren't. I'm not at all suggesting that distinguishing, separating those is not a valuable, a good thing. What I am suggesting, however, is that playing up the differences between all of these different groups is a way to make it more difficult for them to overcome their differences and unify. And when they unify, they have power, potential power. When they fight amongst themselves, they don't. Who wins in that kind of a situation? The American Federation of Labor, which is an organization made up of craft unions, becomes incredibly successful in some of its negotiation and some of its activities in the late 19th and early 20th century. And I am suggesting that a good part of their success is attributable to the fact that the alternative to the AFL is much more threatening. The more you can do in conjunction with the AFL, the less likely you're going to end up dealing with something, an organization that's a lot worse, whose demands are a lot more threatening. We've got 15 minutes left in the program, and this is the conclusion. This is what I really want to end our week with. By the late 19th century, not only is the Industrial Revolution taking off in America, but America is still, in large part, an agricultural nation. And at the same time that all of this organizing union activity is happening in the cities and in the factories in industrial America, at the same time, there's similar kinds of organization happening in rural America among farmers. The creation of something called the Grange. And in the 18th century, the 1870s, the movement of something called the Granger movement. And in many of the Midwestern states, Grange representatives are able to influence state legislatures in order to regulate the behavior and the activities and the rates of railroads, because farmers are totally dependent upon railroads to get their products to market. And the farmers feel that they're being gouged by the railroads. The railroads are charging them exorbitant rates. And so the farmers begin to organize. And by the late 1880s, it begins to dawn on certain people, what if we could find a way to unite the farmers and the industrial workers' unions together? What if we really fulfilled the concept of organizing into one giant organization, all people who worked, in order to separate them from the scoundrels who don't? And thus, in the late 80s, you have an effort to create something called the Populist Party, a political party whose goal is to organize everybody who works, urban labor, rural labor, farmers, industrial workers, skilled, unskilled, blacks, whites, immigrants, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, everybody into one giant union into one giant political party, we could take over the United States. This is the ultimate majority faction. This is the opportunity for the working people of America to take power, take control over government, which was always on the sides of the employers and business and corporate America anyway. Let's take it and make government do our bidding. And so in 1892, the populists hold a national convention in Omaha, Nebraska. And they adopt a platform for what they call the People's Party of the United States. Its purpose is to represent the common people, mostly farmers, but also urban workers as well, against the entrenched interests of railroads, bankers, processors, corporations, and the politicians who are in league with them. And they develop a platform for their political campaign in 1892. Go on the internet and Google Populist Party Platform 1892, and you will find a document which says the following in its preamble. And I'm reading. The conditions which surround us best justify our cooperation. We meet in the midst of a nation brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin. Corruption dominates the ballot box, the legislatures, the Congress, and touches even the ermine of the bench, even the courts are party to this. Back to the text. The people are demoralized. Most of the states have been compelled to isolate the voters at polling places to prevent universal intimidation and bribery. The newspapers are largely subsidized or muzzled. Public opinion is silenced. Business prostrated. Homes covered with mortgages. Labor impoverished. And the land concentrated in the hands of capitalists. The urban workmen are denied the right to organize for self-protection. Imported pauperized labor beats down their wages. A hireling standing army, unrecognized by our laws, is established to shoot them down, and they are rapidly degenerating into European conditions. The fruits of the toil of millions are badly stolen to build up the colossal fortunes of a few, unprecedented in the history of mankind. And the possessors of these, in turn, despise the republic and endanger liberty. From the same prolific womb of governmental injustice, we breed the two great classes, tramps and millionaires. The national power to create money is appropriated to enrich bondholders. A vast public debt payable in legal tender currency has been funded into gold-bearing bonds, thereby adding millions to the burdens of the people. I would suggest to you this could almost be the news on CNN. Silver, which has been accepted as coin since the dawn of history, has been demonetized to add to the purchasing power of gold by decreasing the value of all forms of property as well as human labor. And the supply of currency is purposely abridged to fatten usurers, bankrupt enterprise, and enslave industry. Finance is against us. The banks are against us. There's not enough money being printed, etc., which means we can't pay our debt. which means where a property is being foreclosed on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A vast conspiracy against mankind has been organized on 2 continents, and it is rapidly taking possession of the world. If not met and overthrown at once, it forebodes terrible social convulsions, the destruction of civilization, or the establishment of absolute despotism. This is the worldview of the People's Party in 1892. From the establishment's perspective, is this threatening or what? This is a hell of a lot more threatening than workers who go out and strike for an extra dime an hour or an extra holiday or health benefits or whatever else they might want. The populist platform goes on. We have witnessed for more than a quarter of a century the struggles of the 2 great political parties, Democrats and Republicans, for power and plunder, while grievous wrongs have been inflicted upon the suffering people. The political parties are part of the problem, not part of the solution, they're saying. We charge that the controlling influences dominating both these parties have permitted the existing dreadful conditions to develop without serious effort to prevent or restrain them. Neither do they now promise us any substantial reform. They have agreed together to ignore in the coming campaign every issue but one. They propose to drown the outcries of a plundered people with the uproar of a sham battle over the tariff, so that capitalists, corporations, national banks, rings, trusts, watered stock, the demonetization of silver, and the oppression of the usurers may all be lost sight of. The 2 parties propose to sacrifice our homes, our lives, and our children on the altar of Mammon, to destroy the multitude in order to secure corruption funds from the millionaires. This is the populist campaign perspective in 1892. Tell me that this doesn't look to be one of the most dangerous, potentially revolutionary elections in the nation's history. It's pretty obvious that the establishment at all levels is going to have to do something to find a way to defeat this movement. With 3 minutes left before the top of the hour, let me suggest to you that the development of the so-called progressive movement, which is seen as the liberal challenge to the conservative establishment, is in reality the system's intelligent response to this radical threat. I would suggest to you that progressivism, despite the efforts of corporate America to paint progressives as radicals, the fact of the matter is the progressive movement is a movement driven by middle-class objectives and priorities. And more than anything else, its goal is to win enough concessions to defuse this movement, because this is the sucker that poses the real threat. When Theodore Roosevelt makes the statement that what he proposes as his new nationalism is not radicalism, but the shrewdest form of conservatism, this is what he's talking about. Food for thought until we get together again and begin to look a little bit more carefully at progressivism. It's 59 minutes after the hour. I invite you all to stay tuned. Bob Kincaid is winding it up and ready to begin. I'm Bill O'Brien. On behalf of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution, I bid you good day, good health, be safe. Thank you.